полна чудес, страна чудес, и все здесь вероятно. То вырастаешь до небес, то вниз растешь обратно.
Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of Season 2 of Wonderland Wednesday. We've got a lot of great episodes coming up for you. Sarah and I have actually filmed quite a few for this season already. In fact, a couple of them we actually filmed for last season before I decided to break for the holidays. But we'll start getting into those next week. This week, I wanted to talk about one that I kind of didn't think Sarah would want to watch because Sarah has not shown a whole lot of enthusiasm for animated versions so far. She likes the Disney one, which we'll get to eventually. But we watched that Japanese one and she was not a fan. And I kind of figured that this one would have some of the same issues as the Japanese one. And I was kind of right, so I just figured I would spare her having to watch it and watch it myself. This one is actually a Russian animated version, and I'm going to be talking about two different shorts today. One was Alice in Wonderland, and the other was Through the Looking Glass. They made one year and one the next. And I'm not sure what these were for. There's very little information available online. But when you put them together, it's sort of like you're watching a short movie based on both books. So I figured I would just talk about them both together. They're both extremely similar. They both were obviously made by the same people, same character designs. Everything is basically the same. They're basically the same work. They were just separated into two stories. Since they're both the same, they both suffer from kind of the same issues. I will say that Through the Looking Glass is definitely a little better than Alice in Wonderland, but they both suffer from, I think, some of the same things we talked about when we talked about the Japanese version, which was that I think bits and pieces got lost in translation, or in the case of poetry, I don't think that it translated well enough, and they knew that, and then they just subbed out the poetry in Alice in Wonderland for their own poetry. I don't know. There was something about a bug instead of the little crocodile poem. Just little odd things like that here and there that you could tell that they changed, probably because of translation issues. But then it is a half-hour episode, so it also suffers from having to cram all of that story into one single half hour. And to me, there was just too much missing to make it fully enjoyable. Like when she ends up in the Hall of Doors, she ends up right outside afterwards and talking to the caterpillar. And for some reason, the caterpillar is like an old granny caterpillar. It was an odd choice. Not a bad choice. Like if somebody else had done it in a different version, I might have liked it. It was just odd. And it didn't look very good. That's kind of the biggest issue with this is character design. None of the characters are all that attractive. Alice is very homely. I wouldn't say anyone is ugly, but nobody looks that great. And maybe that's the look they were going for. Maybe this is on purpose. But to me, I didn't really care for it. The animation throughout this thing was also kind of strange. It was like they meshed two styles together. If the story had been a bit better, the writing had been a bit tighter, maybe I wouldn't have minded so much. But because the story was already throwing me off, I was probably looking for things to pick over, and the animation, part of it was sort of hand-drawn, and the other part was sort of stop-motion paper cutouts. And none of it looked bad, per se, but I guess the combination of the not very good character design and the already not great writing, I don't know. It didn't work for me. I guess the biggest problem with this version, probably more so the Alice in Wonderland half, was that it was just kind of boring. Like I said about the old granny caterpillar, if somebody else had done this, I think I would have found it a more interesting choice. But because the writing was so drab and they were speeding through the story, there was just nothing to really get attached to, and I found myself really bored with watching it. All the colors were drab. None of the characters had that great of a delivery. I mean, it was in Russian, so I don't know. Through the Looking Glass was slightly less boring. I guess that could also be because I've seen so many versions of Alice in Wonderland, and Through the Looking Glass is a little bit more rare for people to adapt, so I was more invested in seeing what kind of things they were going to use for the story. I guess I was more interested in seeing what was going to make it into Through the Looking Glass than I was in Alice in Wonderland. And a lot did make it into Through the Looking Glass, but very truncated versions. And there were some odd changes too. Like the weirdest one was, if you've read the book, you know the scene with all the interesting bugs. That was changed to be flying elephants and flying exploding tree hippo moths. Yeah, it was a 5-second scene, and the tree flew away because the moths flew into. I don't know. It was very weird. It didn't make a whole lot of sense. It was like they were trying to be random and nonsensical in their own way rather than in the way that was written. Whatever. It was strange. Another big change was the Red Queen was the Black Queen. I guess that's because most chessboards are black and white instead of red and white. But the colors of red and white are such a big part of Through the Looking Glass that it seemed very strange that they would change it to black and white just because a chessboard is usually black and white. And it wasn't a horrible choice. The character was basically the same. It was just, I don't know. It's already so drab looking. Red could have spiced it up a little bit, and I kind of wish it would have. Anyway, in the end, I would have to say that I probably would recommend these to fans of Alice in Wonderland, as long as they know that they're not going to get a very faithful adaptation. The main reason that I would recommend these is because it's just interesting to see what kind of spin another country would put on it, because I really like seeing different versions from around the world. So in that respect, I did enjoy this version, but if you're wanting a faithful adaptation of Alice in Wonderland with bright colors, fun dialogue, and enjoyable characters, look elsewhere, because this one is not it. I recommend this one solely based on the cultural content, I guess. Anyway, I think that's going to be all for this week. Next week, Sarah will join me to talk about a version that we filmed last summer. This is one of the ones that we filmed in advance before I decided to break for the holidays. We'll be talking about the 1966 BBC version. I know we already talked about a BBC version last season, but this one is from 2 decades earlier and is completely different. So completely different. We actually talked so long, there's a very good chance that I'll get 2 episodes out of it. We'll see what happens when I start editing. Anyway, we'll see you next time. Bye.
В стране чудес одна беда, здесь как-то непонятно. Когда идешь ты не туда, придешь ли ты обратно? Когда идешь ты не туда, придешь ли ты обратно?